recorded. Let's get it. Alrighty. So for today's subtopic, continuing the forward focus, today's topic is the pessimistic attitude. So the little quote that she puts in the bottom of the title, she puts tendency to expect the worst to happen. So that's kind of like the general like meaning of like what a pessimistic attitude is, and the APA, well, the American Psychology Association, they describe it as the attitude that things will go wrong and that people's wishes or aims are unlikely to be fulfilled. So it's just like overall like a synonym for it's like negative attitudes, like gloomy or like doubting. So people don't have like, if you have like that type of attitude, they don't have the hope that whatever they're aiming for will happen, or like something that they wish would happen will not. Like they'll look at the negative side of it instead of like the positive side, or like the light at the end of the tunnel. So I wanted to start off with an example about like being pessimistic, like having that attitude from the Bible, specifically in 2 Kings chapter 6 verses 24 to 29. Oh, just kidding. I'll be going all the way to 33. Sorry. I think I only put 29. So it says, sometime later, that's funny. Can we go back to, wait, where are we? 23, 24. Oh, I have it put wrong. Sometime later, however, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and besieged Samaria. As a result, there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver, and a cup of dove's dung sold for 5 pieces of silver. One day, as the king of Israel was walking along the wall of the city, a woman called to him, "Please help me, my lord. Please help me, my lord the king." He answered, "If the Lord doesn't help you, what can I do? I have neither food from the threshing floor nor wine from the press to give you." Then the king asked, "What is the matter?" She replied, "This woman said to me, 'Come, let's eat your son today, then we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we cooked my son and ate him. Then the next day I said to her, 'Kill your son so we can eat him,' but she has hidden her son." So just like this part I want to focus on specifically just real quick is just showing like how drastic or like how serious the situation was, like their famine, like to the point where it says like the donkey's head and like a dove's dung was sold for 5 pieces of silver, like to the point where things like that were getting like really expensive for them to buy. I mean, that's like dove's droppings were getting like used, I think it was like for fire. So it's getting like, even that was getting expensive and something that you usually wouldn't. And then also like this example with the women, like they were eating like children, like each other's children. Like that just shows how serious like the famine was and how like desperate these people were in that situation. And then could we go to verse 30? I think I stopped on that one. So verse 30 says, "When the king heard this, he tore his clothes in despair, and as the king walked along the wall, the people could see that he was wearing burlap under his robe next to his skin. I'm gonna make this bigger. May God strike me and even kill me if I don't separate Elisha's head from his shoulders this very day," the king vowed. Elisha was sitting in his house with the elders of Israel when the king sent a messenger to summon him. But before the messenger arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "A murderer has sent a man to cut off my head. When he arrives, shut the door and keep him out. We will soon hear his master's steps following him." While Elisha was still saying this, the messenger arrived, and the king said, "All this misery is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" So, I mean, in this section, we see that the king is going after Elisha, and Elisha's anticipating it. And then going into chapter 7, verse 1, the story continues. And verse 1 says, Elisha replied, "Listen to this message from the Lord. This is what the Lord says. By this time tomorrow, in the markets of Samaria, 6 quarts of choice flour will cost only 1 piece of silver, and 12 quarts of barley grain will only cost 1 piece of silver." The officer assisting the king said to the man of God, "That couldn't happen even if the Lord opened the windows of heaven." I'm sorry, that's verse 2. All right, so, and then I'll stop right there. So here we see firsthand, like, the pessimistic attitude in action, like the officer's words himself saying that couldn't happen even if the Lord opened the windows of heaven. So he's even, he's having that negative thought that the message that God gave to Elisha would not come true, and that it seems like highly impossible to happen, just because of how I mentioned how drastic the situation was, and how bad the famine was. So he says that even like God himself like wouldn't be able to make the situation happen so quickly. And then so this is just like how a pessimistic attitude would be, just like if you, I mean, in one way it could be said in anything, just like not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because like in their situation, like it'll be hard to see, their way out, especially after seeing how drastic the people have taken it. Like if I heard, like, or if I was like in that situation, hearing like the women, the people were eating their children, like that's how like bad it was, So like I could understand why his thoughts were so lost in the negativity, but it's also like I'm talking later about like how to change that thinking. So but in this case right here, seeing how he doubted like God's words and like the way God would be able to move in the situation. And then this example is kind of long, but later on, like later in the verses, it talks about the 4 men with leprosy. So they're willing to go into the Aramean. I never looked up how to pronounce that. Army to beg, and they were hopeful something can happen. So they were planning on going in. They were saying like, oh, like what's the worst that can happen? Like they were willing to go into the army camp, the army station, and like attempt to get food from there. And so then if we go to verse 5, I think it's 5. I have it so tiny. Yeah. It says, so at twilight they set out for the camp of the Arameans. I'm gonna say Arameans. But when they came to the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Aramean. Oh my gosh, I should have looked up the pronunciation. Aramean army to hear the clatter of speeding chariots and galloping of horses and the sounds of great army approaching. The king of Israel has hired the Hittites and Egyptians to attack us, they cried to one another. So in this case, it like clearly states how like it says God, the Lord caused the army to hear the clatter. So it's just seeing like God's hand within the situation already. We already see like his hand moving within that. So it's like at times it'll not be so like obvious for us to see like, oh, he's making these things happen one thing after another. Because like there'll be many situations in the Bible or like maybe in our lives when we think back, we're like, oh, like God was setting this up, or like because nothing's ever really at least I don't like believe in like coincidence. I believe that he set everything in its time like perfectly. So in this case, like he allowed them like to hear like the speeding chariots and galloping horses, so that way they are able to come in to the camp, and that they're able to get into like the food and wine and all that stuff. And then we'll see, where is it? Lord God, don't do this share. Can you go to the next one? Can you go to another one? One more down. There you go. In verse 8, then we could see like what they were able to get. And it says, when the lepers arrived to the edge of the camp, they went into one tent after another, eating and drinking wine, and they carried off silver and gold and clothing and hid it. Finally, they said to each other, "This is not right. This is a day of good news, and we aren't sharing it with anyone. If we wait until the morning with calamity, some calamity will certainly fall upon us. Come on, let's go back and tell the people at the palace." So we see here like all of the great things that they were able to get from the army not being there in their camp. So like, there we see like just like how God like allowed the situation to happen. Like later on, well, in the same story, we see another pessimistic attitude. Even though something good has happened, the king still had like negative thoughts about what had happened, and we'll see it in verse 12 again. So like they ended up going and reporting back to the palace. So if you could skip to 12, please, verse 12. It's like a lot of skipping, sorry. It's because if I read the whole thing, it'd be really long. So it says, the king got out of bed in the middle of the night and told the officers, "I know what has happened. The Arameans, I'm gonna just say Arameans, no, we are starving, so they have left their camp and have hidden in the fields. They are expecting us to leave the city, and then they will take us alive and capture the city." So I put the whole thing. Yeah. Oh no, you know what? I'll read the rest. Yeah. Verse 13 says, one of his officers replied, "We had better send out scouts to check into this. Let them take 5 of the remaining horses. If something happens to them, it will be no worse than if they stay here and die with the rest of us." So 2 chariots with horses were prepared, and the king sent scouts to see what had happened in the Aramean army. They went all the way to the Jordan River, following a trail of clothing and equipment that the Arameans have thrown away in their mad rush to escape. The scouts returned and told the king about it. Then the people of the Samaria rushed out and plundered the Aramean camp. So it was true that 6 quarts of choice flour were sold that day for 1 piece of silver, and 12 quarts of barley grain were sold for 1 piece of silver, just as the Lord had promised. The king appointed the officer to control the traffic at the gate, so he was knocked down and trampled to death as the people rushed out. So everything happened exactly as the man of God had predicted when the king came to his house. So here we see like God's words being completed, and even though the king was told beforehand of the way that God would provide or things how would end up for them, like there was actually like a bright side to their situation, and they would be provided for. Not only did firstly the officer doubt his words, but also the king, when the 4 men confirmed that what they had found, he was still doubtful and was like thinking negative about the army, that saying that like, oh, this can't be, like this must be a trap, that this can't actually be true. And that's just like the pessimistic attitude, thinking they're thinking that the worst can possibly happen instead of actually believing that they're going to be provided for and that things can turn around. And one thing that I found interesting was like the author made a note like stating that like well, in the book it says it could be that his behavior, he had influenced his officials' attitude. So like the king's behavior could have like influenced his officials' attitude. So like here we see like the official and the king, like they're side by side, because it says like the king was leaning on him, so we'd see like how closeness they were. So it shows that like this attitude doesn't always just stay within a person. It could be like influenced also. So it's also just like being careful, like who you surround yourself around. Like if you're around people with like that pessimistic attitude, like it'll most likely like rub off on you if you're not careful enough. Just because like, oh yeah, it's just like that influence, especially if you're like with that person for so long, or like if you have like somebody that you're just always you're with all the time and they have like that constant negative attitude. Sometimes something's gonna happen and you're probably the first thing you'll think is like negative thoughts. And I mean, that's normal because it happens to me, but it's just like holding on to that negative thoughts and like letting it brew within you, and just like like ruining it for you. Like instead of looking at the bright side, you just remain within the dark negative attitudes. And like an example, like within like my personal life, I would say is like the way that like I display like my negative like attitude or like my negative thoughts. It's like one example for me would just be like running late. Like I don't like being late, but like I'm not perfect and I know I am, but like I just hate, being late. I try now. But that's just me. And like I'm always with Meredith, so we're always together. So if I'm like running late or like if I'm rushing, I'm rushing her too. Or like before when I would like depend on my mom for rides, like I would be like rushing her and like being like on her. And like my thing is when I'm late, I think like all of the negative consequences that come out of it, like I go into like, okay, I'm late. It's gonna cause like this whole like domino effect of like negative things for the rest of the day. Like if I'm late to come here, like I think like, oh, like it makes me look bad, or like something I bet something's not even working, and if I would have gotten there earlier, like it would have worked out, or if I got there late, like they didn't have the extra hand, and maybe they're like set back on starting the stream or something. Like I start to get into like that thought, and I don't think about what like my thing is like what Meredith like had showed me, or like I've heard about it before, but it was always like I let the negative thoughts cloud it. Like running late, like if something sets you back, like I forgot, I think we missed like an exit one time, like on a freeway, and we were getting late to somewhere. I don't remember where we were going, but we missed the exit, and like it just so happened that like we missed it. I don't know, and then I was like, oh my gosh, like we missed it, we're gonna be late, and I was going on about this whole thing, and she's like, oh well, maybe God allowed it to happen. Like there's a reason like everything happens. And I was like, yeah, but like we late. Like I was like still in it. Like I was just like, there's nothing good that can come out of this. Like absolutely not. But I think there was like another time, and it's funny because it just keeps like getting confirmed, and like he keeps showing up. I think one time we like heard on the news or something that like, or like I think we passed it at some point. I think it was on the freeway too. There was like 4 cars that got into like a car crash. And then I think that day we were also like running late. We had been set back. And then Meredith was like, oh, look, see, like there's a reason why everything happens. And I was like, oh, no, yeah, like that's true. And like it's just like having that like person to like, keep you back on track. And that's like, well, I'll get into that in a bit. But just like me, myself, like I was always like expressing like my negative. I would always do it like through my body language. Or like you can ask my family, I'm always rushing, going crazy. But, at the end of the day, like if something happens, like it's about looking at the bright side of it. Like what did God prevent me from going into, like in that certain situation. Like I think it was last Sunday, 2 Sundays ago, I think he was saying that like, oh, like much better being here and like being set back in service than to being outside. And I think he gave like an example of like an accident happening, like, and he's like, oh, like if only like, like God does things for a reason. Like we're being set back, or like something happens because he wants to like protect you from it, or like I said, like in the story how I was saying like God was moving. And it's like we don't see it at times until like it finally passes. Like it wasn't until I saw the car crash and I saw like the damage where I was like, oh, like, he was protecting me, or like this happened for a reason. So like sometimes we don't see it in this situation because we're clouded by like the negative thoughts about it, or we're just like we're thinking like nothing good can come out of this, or like we're just stuck like in that pessimistic attitude. And then but there's like ways to like overcome it. My bad. So the author gives like an example of a verse about like shifting your thinking. And like thinking is like the most powerful thing, because like I said, like I overthink about everything, like all the negative things that can come out of it, and like there's like no bright side to it, right? Like the thoughts just keep on going. So an example that she gave was Philippians 4:8 was, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think of things that are excellent and worthy of praise. So it's just that thing about like fixing our thoughts, right? Like changing, that's like our theme, right, of the year, like changing our thoughts, or like rethinking about like certain things. And this could be like something small too, like rethinking like the way, like our situations, right? Like the different perspective, like the bright side of it. And it's like instantly we're not gonna think about the bright side of it, but at the end of the day, it's just like kind of adapting those thoughts of like, okay, like this had to happen for a reason, like trusting God's process in it, even though it's like it might be hard, or the negative thoughts just like they're persistent. And some strategies that she gave. The first one was to, I'm gonna read it from the book because she gives like 3 strategies to like overcome like this attitude. And the first one, it says, be candid with others about your quest to conquer pessimism. Give them why am I like this? Give them permission to point out when you are being negative. So sometimes like if you're like a pessimistic person, like you won't always like catch yourself when you make a slight comment, or like when you're being negative, like maybe it's like your body language, you're showing that you're like irritated, or you're just like or like I said, like you make a side comment that you're being negative. And just says like being like giving that friend like the permission to like approach you about it, but also like you yourself, if you like see it in somebody, also like pointing it out, like, oh, like, I mean, like kind of like how like Meredith like checked me on it, 'cause she quick to do that, but she was like, she was like, oh, like, look at this, like this happened, right? Like she checked me on the attitude, and like not in a bad way, like I didn't take it bad, because I was like, oh, that's true, like it could have been worse, or like things could have actually happened, but instead of being stuck in like all the negative things that can happen, or like my plan to be there early wasn't fulfilled, but like there was like a reason for it. And things happen, like not just being stuck in that negative mindset. And then like there's like examples also like in the Bible, like being confronted by other people, like it's okay, and like God uses people to like confront others about it. Like it was like Nathan and David. Like I think Nathan confronted David about his sin with like Bathsheba, and then Samuel confronted Solomon about not obeying God when he was supposed to like kill like the whole like wipe out the whole city, but he kept some of the animals because he wanted to like sacrifice them. But like these people were like called to like tell them, like expose like their sin to them. And then the next strategy is to limit your exposure to negative input. So it's like media, movies, and music. And so like I think like maybe we could think of like one song, like maybe in specific, that just like dreads about like the negative things, right? Like, oh, there's like the negative thoughts about like things cannot possibly go right? Like just like completely in the dark side. Like I know like songs can like change your mood, and like sometimes you're in a mood for like something sad, or like just like not feeding into like the negative mindset, or like the pessimistic mindset that like nothing will ever go right, or that things only worse things can possibly happen in your life. And then I mean, we know like with like social media, like we see like different posts, and like I know like when like COVID started, that was like all over the media, and like it was like striking like fear like everywhere, and like that was like the only thing that we saw, right? Like just like building up the fear within people. So it was like things like that, like it built fear, and like people, or like maybe you're like some social media is like kind of tailored to everybody, right? Like TikTok is like tailored to certain people, and like sometimes you get people that are really like pessimistic about life, right? Like they're just like, oh, like nothing could ever go right in my life, like only the worst, like if I try to put myself out there or do something, like only the worst can happen, like nothing good could ever come out from doing something. So like that could also feed into like the pessimistic attitude, but removing yourself from that type of environment would help you grow more positive. And then the last thing is just like, the last one she mentions is to volunteer to serve others who are less fortunate. Serving creates positive feelings and gives you a sense of value, and it is also the right thing to do. So kind of like, if you help serve others, you're able to see the positive side of helping others, just like, and also helping them like see the positive side in life, even though like, things are wrong, or like maybe they haven't felt like the cards were set out right for them. But, you could be that voice of like faith, right? So like that's what optimism is. It's faith, because like even though you don't know the outcome of things, or like you're in the middle of like a battle, you don't know the outcome of things at the moment, but like it's just about having faith in God that he does have his hand involved in the situation. And then one example of that could be like when Jesus calms the storm. So I'll go ahead and read it. So it'll be in Mark 4, chapter 4, verses 35 to 40. And it says, "As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, 'Let's cross to the other side of the lake.' So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came, high waves and breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat and his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, 'Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?' When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, 'Silence, be still.' Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, 'Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?'" So, I mean, in the middle of a storm, like, it'll be hard to think like the good thing that could come out of it, right? But, the lesson that came out of it was like to have faith in God and like trust that he does have everything under control, even though like the waves and like the storm seem so big. It's just about, not having that doubt. Like optimism is about that. Like if you're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or that you will see the light at the end of the tunnel, like even though you're through all that darkness, like optimism is just like, it's the opposite, right? Of negative, seeing that positive outlook in life, even though like at the moment everything is like dark, like I said, not thinking like, oh, like this cannot, something bad happens to you, and like you hold on to that, where you're like, okay, everything's just gonna keep on getting negative, everything's just gonna keep on going under. But just having that faith that God is under control, and that he is like all powerful, and like how I said in the example earlier, like through the beginning, like God spoke, and he eventually like moved his hand within the situation, allowing the army to leave, and then allowing them to come in and get into like, getting the things that they needed when he said he would. And, his promises are never empty. They're like clear and like for sure. And we've seen like in the Bible the many examples that he's come through with his promises. And that's just how he is. And that's just like the big thing about optimism, is having faith, because faith is, believing without seeing. And, even though we can't see the outcome of things, always just remembering that God's there, and he'll hold on to us. And then that is it.